Welcome to Anecdotal Anatomy, the podcast that curiously explores the stories the body holds and tells through conversations, stories, and practices. Our mission is to connect the individual to the collective through our stories, so we may better understand our interdependence and ultimately live a more peaceful coexistence. Is that too much to ask for? Each episode builds from the last and contains kernels of every conversation we've had to date.
We cover science-y things like fascia, anatomy, the nervous system, and other body-based sciences. We also have a pretty high tolerance for the woo factor, which, let's face it, is also energy and should not be discarded as if it has no value. We are nature-loving, yoga and meditation teaching podcasters that could, aiming to make the world just a little better than we found it. Our motto is, leave no trash trace, we're only visiting, but leave your heart print with every step.
Welcome back to Anecdotal Anatomy. Before we talk about what to expect from today's episode, we're super excited to announce that we'll be hosting a free 90-minute workshop on Sunday, February 26th from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. It is the first in a series of free offerings that we will be calling Discover Your Excellence. This first one will be Discover Your Excellence, the Power of a Personal Practice. We'll explore the ways and means of creating a sustainable home practice while having a ton of fun doing it. Mark your calendars right now and stay tuned for more information on how you can register.
As for today's episode, we're calling it channel surfing. Therese and I are going to add a little more anatomy to our anecdotes. We're going to overlay a scientific template over the subtle body anatomy templates to kind of, just increase our awareness, increase our understanding, and grow our vocabulary. So we're calling it channel surfing because we're moving, like we're channel surfing. We're clicking from one thing to another, but we're also going to be directly relating to channels of the body, systems of the body. Therese is going to talk about cranialsacral work, and I'm going to talk a little bit about chakras. And so whether you are well versed in these topics or not, hopefully you'll have something to take away. And if the language gets a little bit languagey for you, send us an email, ask us questions. Let us know your responses to today's episode. We are curious.
Okay, so first I'm going to talk about last week, and then I want to maybe touch a little bit on why we chose the subject for today, which I find really quite interesting. So last week I was talking about the quadriceps, and when I went back and listened, I realized when I was talking about the actions, they may have been a little bit off. So just a clarification for those other anatomy geeks out there, the quadriceps extend the knee, which I believe I said, but I limited it to only one of the quads. So the major quadricep muscle, rectus femoris, crosses two joints, the hips and the knee. So that one quadricep also helps to flex the knee. But the quadricep group, quad, four muscles, their major action is to extend the knee and flex the hip. So just a little clarification right there. So thank you for the reminder, Sherry. I also wanted to talk about why we picked what we're going to talk about today, which is a little bit of science and a little bit of yoga. And we're going to kind of blend a lot of different things. So I took a cranialsacral therapy class today, and I'm going to say that it was amazing. Cranialsacral work is very, very subtle, very light. And I came out of there feeling like I had found the key to something that had been missing in my work. And it's not the first time I've studied craniosacral therapy, but sometimes you study something and then one day everything just kind of comes together and falls into place. And This is probably the very first time that I can say that I honestly feel like I and other people, my working therapists in the course, where I felt like we stepped into the same energy center together. So we'll expand a little bit more on craniosacral therapy, but that seemed to match beautifully with what Sherry's going to come into the conversation with. Do you wanna take it from there and explain from your side?
Sure. As much as I can explain, but it's really interesting how the gross and the subtle come together, how the conversation between the things we can touch and see and the energetic things that are happening within our bodies are kind of finding their own symbiosis, their own homeostasis, that balance that you were talking about. But sometimes we're out of balance. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the energy, the subtle body anatomy, which in yoga speak is really about the chakras and the nadis. And nadis are channels throughout the body that through which energy flows. And depending on what you read, you may find there are 72,000 nadis in the body, or there are 84,000 nadis in the body. Oh my God, that's too overwhelming for me. So we're going to just distill it down and, focus on the three main nadis, these three main channels that seem to, if you were to sort of draw a picture of what you imagine Sushumna, the central channel, that's like the anterior side of the spine. If you go deep in the body, that long sort of spinal shape, and that there are two channels on either side that run parallel to the Sushumna. That if you were to draw that and overlay that image over the cranial sacral image that Teresa was showing me as she was moving through her workshop or her classes, it's pretty uncanny how different traditions will enter the body in different ways. So anatomy, science, massage, touch, yes, you're going to be dealing with the tangibles. But so, oh my goodness, all of a sudden we have this energetic template to overlay that, and we can see how harmonious and not just harmonious. And I don't want to get all into like, oh, this energy thing, but it's a tangible place from which to work. So if there's something that is going on and you feel unbalanced, it's kind of an internal map that we get to access. And once we learn a little bit about it, and I've been teaching chakras for a long time now, in teacher trainings and to dancers and in workshops and things like that, that there are different traditions. There are different ways into the chakras, just as many ways in as there are imbalances to work with. So, for example, and just to go really very, not quickly, because I'll talk about the chakras in a little bit, but Sushumna and Ida and Pingala, those are the three main nadis that we're going to talk about. And like I said, Sushumna, you can imagine is like your spine, if that you need an image for that. But then to the left is this nadi called Ida. And Ida, and since it's left and since it's sort of more moon driven, I kind of assigned it the yin energy, which I don't know. I haven't seen that anywhere else, but it may actually exist. But the left side channel, the side channels hold our afflictions. They hold our discursive thought. They hold our limited beliefs. The central channel, Sushumna, is when it's aligned and when it is in balance, it is where bliss, it is where that pure awareness, pure consciousness lives. And if you can imagine that discursive thought, that this idea that agitation and that cannot share the same space as bliss. So we work to balance. So on Ida, on the left side, it's the moon energy. It's a milky white. It's cooling. It's female energy. Feeling the yin now? It houses our negative thoughts that are cravings, things that are addictions, things that are extreme desires, and the misunderstanding that if we have them, that'll make us happy. If only I had more money, if only I had a better partner, if only I lived in a bigger house, if only I had a better job, I'd be happy. These are things that are framed in wanting, in greed, in lust, in clinginess, in jealousy, in selfishness, stinginess. So those are all the afflictions that live in Ida. Now let's go over to Pingala on the right side, which is the sun. This is more yang. It's opaque red. Cannot see through this red. It's heating. It houses thoughts that you don't want to have. Your thoughts, your discursive thought around low level irritations like, if only I didn't have this partner, job, house, friend, what money, whatever, then I would be happy. I'd be fine only if. So this comes into a container of anger and frustration, aversion and irritation. maybe rage or violence. Like these are the extremes. So both of these channels can hold from low level irritations to extreme, experiences. So, you can see how that energy, depending on where you are in any given day, you may feel a little more of the craving, a little more of the I don't want. But so then there's Sushumna, the central channel, which when we were talking earlier, I started thinking Central Station. It's your central spot. It's, leave Central Station about 8:45. Least favorite Dead song. But this is considered your happy channel. This is where thoughts of wisdom and happiness from low level contentment, santosha, remember santosha, to all out bliss. So Sushumna is where the winds, we talk about vayus in the body in yoga, the winds. So the wind of Sushumna is when we're happy and smart, and it's just, it is what it is. We've got to get out of the negative mindset before we can move fully into Sushumna. So there's a lot of these little things, but this is the energy that we get to work with in the subtle anatomy system. And then we start identifying the energy wheels that live on the anterior side of the spine, which coincide with different places along Sushumna that give us places, energetic places where we can work with the energies that we can sense we're out of balance with, which I'm sure we'll come back around and address as we continue. Was that just the whole episode?
I took an awful lot away from that. I
I'm
learned a
sorry.
lot.
But that's only the groundwork. When we add in the template of the chakras, it adds another whole layer of potential healing and self-understanding, which is what all of this shit is about, right? So, overlay your template to that. Like, what does that kind of resonate?
So I have over the years, one of the things that I do is I look at things and I see them how they look the same and how they look different. So craniosacral therapy, again, some people will, it's not necessarily energy work because it has a physicality to what we're doing and how to facilitate changes within the body. But because it's subtleness, it's a light touch manual therapy. If you can just imagine holding a nickel in the palm of your hand, you may not even realize that it's there. It's so light. And that is conceptually hard to understand what that translates to in I'm touching you with that amount of pressure in a therapy session. Our intention is is to help to tap into the body's self-correcting mechanisms, the body's willingness and understanding that it wants to heal, it knows how to heal, and sometimes there's just something in its way. And craniosacral therapy allows us to not lead but follow, to know that we are a facilitator of these natural mechanisms in the body. And I'm going to take us back to season one for a minute, just to get a little bit deeper into the body's ability to heal itself. Sherry, shared a story about cutting your finger and putting a band aid on and being so amazed, right? That all you had to do was clean it, wash it, and care for it, and the body would grow back together. It's going to heal itself. We also have other healing mechanisms and systems within our body, like our immune response. We have a virus that enters and our immune response gets called into action. It's like, whoa, look at this. We got something that we need to go and take care of. Or if we get hurt, an inflammatory process. These are ways that the body can facilitate and enhance its own ability to heal. Or, some people say, and this comes directly from Upledger, who is one of our cranial sacral founders. This is a lineage of cranial sacral therapists. He would say that in addition to trauma, disease can happen because our system is overwhelmed and it's just exhausted and blocked and it's going to shut down and rest. So let's go back to that overlay that you asked me about. And it's going to be brief because it is a little bit complicated. And everybody knows that I love fascia. So within the inside of our brain, and you may think that the bones of the cranium don't move. But we have supporting research that has a rhythm of those bones having this small abilities to expand and contract in a pump to move fluids from the sacrum to the brain. So we have this contraction and expansion. On the inside of the brain is a membrane, and we're going to call it the dural membrane. There's many, so I'm just this is very distilled. And remember, we're talking anecdotal, so I am by no means an expert in craniosacral therapy, but I'm going to share what I do know. So we have membranes that are inside the body. So we're just going to say inside our cranial vault is a membrane that sits around the brain, around the inner part of the skull, and protects it. And we'll call it the dural, well, we won't call it. It is the dural membrane. Sorry about that.
We'll call it,
We'll call it, yeah,
the
whatever
dural.
Teresa decides. We're going to call it that because Teresa, I think it sounds nice. The dural membrane. Yeah, I'm going to call it that.
So let
And
it be
jump,
written, so let it be done.
yeah, and jump into the arena with my teachers like Upledger and Dr. Sills. Anyway, so this dural membrane is there, but it descends down into the body through the spinal column. And so right at the base of your skull, you may notice that there's a little soft spot right where the head and the neck meet. We're going to I was going to say we're going to call that, but we're not. It is. It's the foramen magnum. Foramen, it means hole. Magnum means big. So it's the big hole at the bottom of our head. And the dural membrane or the dural tube then descends. So as it comes from this membrane that surrounds our brain through the foramen magnum, it attaches itself to the second and third vertebra. So it wants to be stable and has this attachment in the second and third cervical vertebra. And then it has no other attachments as it descends down through that central channel, through the spine, until it gets all the way down to the sacrum, to S2. So beyond your low back and into those lowest parts of the sacrum, where it attaches there and it just embeds or it integrates itself with the periosteum. Again, another word. Periosteum is just a piece of fascia that wraps your bone of our coccyx bone. So when I saw this after you and I had talked about, and I'm going to say it, Sushumna, right? I got it right.
Sushumna.
And I looked at this image in my class. I'm like, I just looked at this when I was preparing. And so it's always exciting to me when I see that different philosophies, Eastern and Western medicine might not be so far apart, that we have these different concepts and we can talk about them in different languages, which is not to say that the two are exactly the same, but I always find it interesting to see how closely related they are in location, how closely related they are in function. And so the function of this dural tube is to move fluid up up and down, back and forth from the sacrum to the cranium to keep it lubricated, to keep our brain lubricated and hydrated. And you know it exists if you've ever had like a spinal tap. That's when unfortunately, it's really painful. But for anybody who's ever had that, they put a needle down into that sacral area where is at the end of the system to pull some of the fluid out and test it for things like spinal meningitis or whatever else. I'm not really well
Guillain-Barré.
versed.
Yeah,
Yes.
Brian's had a couple. It's
So
tough.
that's the fluid that we're looking at. So I just am so excited to look at all of the different ways that the two can appear the same, they integrate, and we can discuss different ways of the body healing from different lineages.
If we're willing to learn from the other lineages. And this goes back to something we've talked about in the past about once we define something, it limits our understanding of it. Because once we define East West, Ayurveda, different wellness thing, like whatever we're packaging, then we already kind of are distancing and it's become something other. And when you started, you said something like, it's not really energy work. And I would suggest that everything we do is energy work. It's just at what level of energy are we working? Because if everything, scientists have told us, everything can be reduced to energy. So everything we do is energy, whether it has a physicality or whether we need to use a little bit more of our imaginations. And, but that's also go back to season one, the layers of the koshas. And when we were talking about the templates, laying template of different systems and study over the other so that we can maybe see where the similar patterns are and where the differences are, that immediately created layers, which got me thinking about the layers of fascia, the superficial fascia, the deep fascia. It got me thinking of the koshas, the different layers of our beings, and how we work through these practices to integrate these understandings of these layers to better understand our wholeness so that we're not separate from the other. And the other thing, when you were talking about the dural tube and the fluids, I started thinking the work we do is a lot like Drano. We find where the clogs are. And if we can recognize where in the tube the clog is, we'll know how much to pour down or how much we need to activate or where the energy center is. I'm going to bring this into the chakras because I think that when we understand like the landmarks and the locations and what the energies represent, then when we get still, when we find a place of stillness, maybe we can better identify where our imbalances are. And before I go into that, I've studied chakras from two different basic lineages, one much more than the other. So the more I've studied is the Anadeya Judith Indian yogic lineage of the chakras, where we identify 7 points along Sushumna, and they coincide with the colors of the rainbow, and they have all these different wonderful associations. The other lineage that I studied from was the Tibetan Buddhist lineage of chakras, where basically there are 5 that we focus on. The color schemes are a little bit different. And I read something on a site called Buddha Weekly that said that, typically we focus on either 4, 5, 7, or 10 chakras. This is not a talk or a podcast about chakras. We will get there, but I will have to do a little more study on that because my scholarship doesn't fall into those areas so much. But the 5 and the 7, a little bit more. But I'm going to focus on the 7 because that's from the Indian yogic lineage of chakras, because that's what I'm most familiar with. But so we have at the base of the spine, Muladhara. Now, Muladhara is in this lineage, it's red. It is, remember, Pingala, also red. That's your right side. But in this, it's more the tribe you're born into. It's your stability in the world. It's your right to be here. It's the ground. It's your foundation. It's the belief systems into which you were born. But it's this, place of being in the world. And the element is earth. We move up to the sacral chakra, which is about where the hips hinge. And that is orange. And the element is water. And the energy around that is creativity, but it's birthing. It's, and some people will talk about birthing creativity, which I will certainly get behind because I think most things are metaphor and hold space for a whole range of opportunities. And those who are maybe more purist may fall more into actual birthing of things, whatever that. So, but that's energy, it's creativity, it's sexuality, it's flow. And then we move up to Manipura, which in some traditions, sort of lands just under the navel, some at the solar plexus. And then I like to kind of think somewhere in the middle there, like the solar plexus is how the landmark for me, but that element is fire. This is where we begin to peel away from that tribal identification and we begin to move more fully from the power, the force, the wisdom of our own experience. We begin to understand better who we are. And that is the place from which we move. But the fire is, it transmutes. It's got that ability to, get rid of all the things we don't need. Well, we're going to come back around to that. We move up to the heart chakra, anahata, which is the air element. And the color is green. And it's our love center. It's how we communicate love. It's how we give love. It's how we receive love. And the element of air, which is one of the more unstable elements that we have, but it's all pervasive. And so the potential for love to be all pervasive is part of how I connect to this center. Then we move up to the throat chakra. So we had Muladhara, Svadhisthana, Manipura, Anahata, Now we're at Vishuddha. I know I was just doing the English for a while. I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to slow down because this is one of the things I work with this chakra, which is the communication center. I talk really fast. This is a place I get to work to balance that energy. And we'll talk about that in a second too. So this idea of communication, Vishuddha, it's a blue color. It's not just about how fast we talk or slow, how loud or soft, the veracity, like, are we liars? Are we truth tellers? Do we fabricate? Do we embellish? Like, what is the nature of our communication? But it's also about how we listen, which is another part that I've been working on and bringing into balance and, taking a look at. But it took this energy center to spark my curiosity around that a little bit deeper to affect change. Then we move up to Agnya, which is that third eye center, which I'm constantly poking. But this is about intuition. This is about the unknowables, knowing the unknowable. It's about your responses. It's how you read the room. It's the energy of, honoring others too. I think it's that I'm throwing that in there. That's my interpretation because when you can read the room, when you can find that energetic connection, that unknowable piece, it deepens. Anyway, then we move up to Sahasrara, which is the crown chakra, which is where the dural tube started when Teresa was talking. We had that little dural nerve membrane. But Sahasrara is our crown chakra and it is our connection to divine. So we go back to Agnya for a moment, third eye. That is either an indigo blue or a violet purple. Again, and it might be different in the Tibetan Buddhist. And I don't think they have this one. I think they go from Sahasrara to Vishuddha. But anyway, so if Agnya was violet purple, Sahasrara is a pure white. That's how I like to do it. I like that connection to divine. If you resonate with Agnya being indigo blue, then Sahasrara is a violet purple. And all of this is, I mean, I'm sure there's an energy to the colors, and I'm sure there's more that we can dive into those energetics, but that's for the episode on the chakras. But all of this is to say all of these different energy centers and their meanings and their qualities, we're not always balanced. So I'll just briefly say in the Tibetan tradition where Ida and Pingala, they're riding alongside of Sushumna, they're the side channels. They cross over. If you're listening and you're not seeing, I'm making a serpentine shape with my hands, moving up the front of my body. So it's kind of like that crossing over, making figure eights, moving up my body. And in the Tibetan Buddhist lineage, where where they cross over each other, they create what they call a choke point. And the choke points are where the chakras are along Sushumna, where the figure eights cross. So, from my understanding, again, this is the study I did in my 300-hour training several years ago. The idea is not so much to balance those energies, but to dissolve the choke points so that the side channels become completely parallel rather than crossing Sushumna, crossing the central channel. So we dissolve those choke points into the side channels so that bliss and happiness can flow through the happy channel. So in the Indian yogic lineage, we still have all of that, except we're not dissolving them into the side channels. We're recognizing where we may be excessive or deficient in the energies of those wheels. So if I feel unstable or ungrounded wherever I go, I get to work with Muladhara. I get to sit with the energy of grounding. I get to do exercises that load my bones, that take me close to the ground. I get to do meditations. I'll wear red underwear, red socks, and red shoes because Muladhara moves from your tailbone all the way down to your feet. So if I'm honoring and I resonate with the colors, then red will be what I wear from, my tailbone down. If I'm maybe a nymphomaniac or someone who really, and I don't say that as a judgment call, but if I'm someone who just loves getting out there and getting busy, maybe there's something to look at there. It's not to say no, it's to come into balance. Say, how much do I really need? Is this external affirmation that I need actually serving me in some way? When I get to Manipur, if I feel like I'm deficient in my ability to really step into my power, then I can envision flames. I can do wind horse. I can do certain tools that will, help bring that increase my energy around that rather than decrease. So, I'm excessive in my throat chakra. How can I work with that? I listen a little bit more. I sing, I do other. So all of this is to say that these energy centers aren't they're not intangible. They're extremely tangible. And when we still our waters enough to be able to notice where the ripples are originating and where they're actually ending up, we have we get to work. We get to do the stuff that helps us heal our own shit.
There are so many similarities when I'm listening to you talk about the placement of the different chakras, the placement of the nadis, and where they align on the body. It brings me right into four of the different fascial type of holds that we do in both myofascial release and cranial-sacral therapy. I use these same hand position with light touch so we can start to release some of those restrictions, maybe releasing choke points. I don't know, but I always find it fascinating how things align. And as I'm listening to you talk about those placements of where those choke points are, it brings me into the transverse fascial planes of the body. And when I mention them to you, you're going to recognize them as something else in yoga. So they align in the places that you talked about, the snaking back and forth. So we have first all the way down in the pelvic diaphragm, which would be placing my hands below the belly button and on the sacrum. So chakra energy centers of the root chakra and the sacral chakra live within that space. So that is a handhold. And when I say fascial planes, it means that there's bands of fascia, thick pieces of fascia, that instead of running north and south, up and down in the way that we stand, they encircle the body from front to back. So placing our hands in that position, sacrum and lower abdomen, feels to me as I was listening to you talk that I'm I'm at least in the same geographic area of how the energy centers and choke points are co-located. And again, I am not a scholar in this. I'm just somebody who likes maps and patterns. And when I see them align, it makes me curious to want to dive deeper. So please don't misunderstand that I'm saying that they're the same thing. I'm just so curious as to how they blend together in this beautiful symbiotic relationship. The next hand position that I would use in my treatment would be the respiratory diaphragm. And we know that that is just below the rib cage. And so I would have a hand just below the ribs. And if you know where your diaphragm is, or you can feel where that breath is, where the diaphragm drops as you take that inhale and ascends as you take that exhale, a hand position would be held there to release any of the tension or blockages that are in that space, which is co-located in the place of the heart chakra. The next one is the thoracic outlet. Now think about putting your hands where your neck and your upper back would meet, where the thoracic and the cervical vertebra make their transition. And the front hand would be just by where the clavicles are, those two bones in the front of the neck. So you would have there, which is throat chakra land, right? So again, we're in these areas in different lineages, in different ways of approaching healing in the body. But the maps that I look at and study, they remind me of the same positioning. And the last one is at the cranial base. And if I wanted to place my second hand, it would be on the forehead, not specifically the crown chakra, but I am looking at the third eye and the cranium in that hold. These are all light touch techniques designed to help the body release any of its restrictions so that the flow of fluid, the flow of energy, the flow of movement becomes unrestricted. And these maps, I wish I was better at graphic design because I would just really love to have all of remember when we had overheads and you would put the
Yeah.
transparency on? I'd like to
Uh-huh.
have all these transparencies and lay them on top of each other, so
And
I
they're
would
also called templates,
yes,
right?
yeah.
That's the first time I ever heard the word template was with an overhead projector.
So I get to, see them, so having my lineages be from so many different places, from body work, from fascia, from cranialsacral, from yoga and yoga traditions, the chakras, maps and systems are things that capture my attention. And to be able to see the commonalities and also the differences between them helps me to come back to the point that you made earlier. When we're willing to move beyond the language that may not sound like a language that we're accustomed to hearing and just look at the information that comes
Mhm.
through these different healing systems, there's beautiful overlaps in how they integrate and work together. Are they the same? I don't know, but I find it fascinating.
So imagine you walk into a healing center, someplace, we're not even gonna call it a hospital or an emergency clinic or whatever, just a space for healing. And going back to this idea of once we define things, we limit our understanding of it. That even if we don't speak the language, we know that when something is witnessed, when we are looking at something, it will change. So there's like when we know something, when we hear a definition, we've already predetermined what that's going to be. But imagine you did an intake going into this healing space and you said that you were feeling unloved, you were feeling overly aggressive, you were feeling an enormous amount of grief, you were feeling unstable in your world, but you're also feeling very loud and very sort of like whatever it is that you're filling in that but I also have a pain in my low back and I've been getting headaches. So whatever the story it is that you're telling on your intake, and you go in, and whoever checks off the boxes at their little computer that's facing the wall anymore, not even looking at the patient. Well, we're not in a hospital though; we're in a healing space. So in this healing space, the practitioner looks at your intake and says, "Oh, okay." And automatically, all of a sudden, because of certain words that come out that sort of take the practitioner to the different chakra points, the energies of those potential healing centers. But accompanied by knowledge of Western medicine and other things that might be helpful, accompanied by knowledge of cranial sacral release and other massage techniques. You lie down on the table, and the first thing you do is you work from the subtle or you work from the energy. So you just sort of put your hands in those handheld positions that you just described in those general areas where the energy coincides with the chakra. And you're doing this massage technique that is just a light, almost an assessment. It's the beginning. It's asking the question without asking the question. It's dealing from that subtle energy before you move deeper. And I know from my impulse, it's usually go from gross to subtle, especially like in the chart of the koshas that we were using with Anamaya first. And I know we talked, there's no particular order. You can go either way. And some places start with the subtle. But this acknowledgement that the subtle energy is a force at play in whatever it is that is creating suffering, illness, whatever pain, whatever it is that you came in with, that you start with that. There's no judgment, there's just a hold. That feeling almost of being in the womb, that you're held by this feminine energy that is almost saying without saying it, you're going to be okay. Everything's fine. Like it's okay. So you're holding that. You're holding that space while you're holding this body. And then you begin to move into more direct response to that. You might even recommend a therapist to someone who's dealing with deeply rooted issues. But, you use the tools at your disposal that are not limited to, your medical school training or your Ayurveda training or the thing that East is better than West is better than East is better than North and South. What the fuck? Like you just take the things that you know that work, that help, that are healing, and you put it into a process of healing for this person. And it feels so much more holistic. And by holistic, all I mean is whole, that you're not negating one thing for another I don't know what the purpose of that is, except that there's a hierarchy of right and wrong. I know better. This is what it is. When there's so much we don't know, there's so much more we don't know than what we do know. So why not experience or allow for different modalities to come into the bigger picture?
I've always been taught as a massage therapist, as a body worker, right from the beginning, is that we're facilitators. And I think that switch in mindset, people have come to me over the years and say, "Oh, I'm here so you can fix me or you can do this or that." But that is not a role that I have. I'm not a fixer. The body is waiting to heal itself. And understanding these different systems in the body fills my toolbox with different techniques to be able to facilitate what the body is already trying to do. So the more that I understand, the more that I am curious, the more that my intention is this body knows a whole lot more about healing than I could ever learn, no matter how much I study. If I take the role as a facilitator, then I allow and I tap into and remove a blockage or, open up a space so that the body can do what it's already trying to do. This article that I read last night, and it's written by, it'll be in the show notes, Marianne Sisto. She's a physical therapist, a craniosacral therapist. And her article is called Craniosacral Therapy. What is it really? And I really love being able to read this after I had received my treatments during the class. So there's first I want to, and the reason that I quoted her here with rather than just putting it in the show notes is that I really do want to read directly from what she says cranial sacral therapy is and see what you think. So the unique patterns of adaptations are thought to be related to pre-lesion state prior to trauma, such as prior to a fall or a car accident. In other words, each trauma that the body is unable to dissipate will be adapted into the system in some way. So it's written into our fabric of form in words that I like. When the body is overwhelmed with the trauma and unable to adapt any further, pain and dysfunction will occur. So it really spoke to me because she talks about how adaptable we really are. I personally got hit by a car when I was 6. It wasn't a major accident, but, traumatically speaking, I was between the wheels of a car on my bicycle. So not only was there the trauma of getting knocked over, but the pain and then, the scariness of being in that position. In reading this, that came back to mind. At that point, I went to the doctor, they did what they needed to do, and I was, you know, for all intent and purposes, healed from that accident. But are there different ways that my system adapted to it and said, yeah, you're basically healed, but we have this little adaptation over here in this place that post trauma that was written into my fabric? What I find fascinating about all of this is how light and intentional the touch of this therapy was. Now, keep in mind that everybody who worked with me, every therapist student in the class that touched my body with these techniques, and everyone that I touched with my technique, we were working as students, learning. And it was transformational. I came out of there just really needing to process so much. It is the first time that I can really say that I felt like I continuously melded the energetic fields of another person and myself. And since I know that we have yoga teachers and some body workers who listen, it really gives us the science and the information that we need, that light touch is deep. And that touch, and even if you're not, if you're thinking about, oh, I want a deep tissue massage, sometimes people think, oh, well, I know what that is. I'm going to go in, there's going to be a lot of pressure. It's going to feel kind of good. It might hurt. And da, 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 now I have deep tissue. But depth and pressure are not the same thing. So think about how holding your own head, just placing your hands lightly on the sides of your head. It doesn't even matter where they're positioned for this tutorial or whatever we're going to call it for this little practice. And however light you're touching, touch even lighter so that you almost feel like your hands are barely touching.
I'm sure you can see it on my hair because it's so bouncy that if when I'm holding it and you said lighten it up, you could see it's almost like a sponge expanding.
Hmm.
Sorry, it made me
That's
laugh.
okay. So you're lightly touching in this space, knowing that the cranium expands and contracts. And we have these different folds of the bones because they are a touch point to get to the dura mater, the fascia that is lining the inside of that cranial fold. So with light touch, we're making significant change in this fascial system or this cranial sacral system that allows for the fluid to flow unrestricted. You don't get any deeper than working on fascia that is in the deepest of the dural tube or the membrane or on the inside of the cranial vault around the brain. So light can be immensely deep.
Yes. I've heard you talk about the pressure and the depth, and I think that's such a fascinating understanding of what's happening to the tissues that what we mean when we say certain things. Like sometimes if I'm driving fast, my husband will be like, not a race. It's not trying to, I was like, but that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I like the feeling of going fast. I'm not racing anyone. I just like the feeling. So when I say I want something deep, it's not necessarily that I'm just making a distinction between pressure and depth. It's that I want the feeling of someone grabbing me and holding me with what, if I say pressure or depth, that without knowing what its effect is, it's the feeling that I'm looking for, that feeling of being strongly held and getting in there because it feels good. I don't know what it's happening. I don't know. But at the same time, I've had that cranial sacral work done and that light touch in conjunction with other things. Like if I was just there doing that, it probably would feel great and I would leave feeling whatever I felt. But that as part of a larger system of body work on the table, it was incredible. Like it just because I was able to leave also feeling satisfied with that feeling that I went in there for. So there's also that expectation that I was, getting that kind of that feeling. You had mentioned something about the fluids earlier before we started recording that got me thinking about, one of the things that are similar about this, but the way that we talk about it differently. And that was prana, the life force, as an energy, not empty, but form is emptiness, emptiness is form. I'll throw that in there every once in a while, but that what's moving through the dural tube is fluid. And so there was this question of, is that energy, is the tube empty in Sushumna, or is it, what is that? But you called it, oh, so you called it still point fluid. I have to look at my
Oh,
thing.
no,
That
still point, no fluid,
still
just still
point.
point.
Oh, I wrote fluid because it was the fluid that was going through, but the still point got me thinking about meditation, finding stillness, that whole thing. But it also, when you were talking about, and you'll go deeper, stopping the flow of fluid, which is probably why I wrote fluid, to then release it, that there's this gush, this feeling, and you'll talk about that. But that in a pose in yoga, when we do eagle pose and we wrap our arms and we squeeze and we wrap our legs and we squeeze them, it's to stop the flow of prana, of this life force energy, to give it that squeeze hold so that when we release, there's that flush of energy moving through our bodies. And when we were talking about it today, I realized, of all the years I've been teaching and practicing, I never really followed the line of questioning of what's happening in the body when we do that and why is it important? What is the benefit? I got that, yeah, we want to squeeze it in and then let it flush. And I had all sorts of images in my head of what it could be doing. And that feeling of just release was
Mm.
enough to satiate any curiosity I may have had. But these conversations have taken my own level of inquiry to different depths. And I'm just so grateful for all of this.
So still point, and so I'll address some of the things in and again, I wanna remind everybody, I am a student at this point, so I'm sharing what I know. But I have talked about this before when I've taught compression in massage school too. When you compress something, it's like stepping on the garden hose, right? Whatever you're compressing that has fluid coming through it, the fluid is going to go from a flush to a trickle because it doesn't really have this clear flow. There's something that is stopping this energetic or fluid flow, whatever we're looking at, that doesn't allow it to move at the same pace that it's moved before. It's like watching a river flow and then seeing a dam. The water doesn't stop at the dam generally, it just slows down and maybe navigates around the dam or finds these little spaces within that dam that it can trickle through. But if you went in and pushed all that debris out of the way in the stream, the water would it would gush and it would flow, and it's a reset. When we have these blockages, hopefully, as we induce a still point, which is holding specific parts of the body that stop the flow for a specific amount of time, and that can be a couple of minutes. When we release it, we get that gush, we get to reset the rhythm with which the fluid is flowing. Same as we would if we were looking at the dam in the stream. You know, if we push it all away, we reset how that fluid is going to flow, how the water is going to flow through the stream. And it's a way of facilitating, flow without obstruction.
That's so interesting. It makes me wonder though, like what's happening in the body during that time of hold? Like, what is the effect of that? Which is something we can, unless you have an answer, I don't know, is sort of asked in a rhetorical way.
Yeah, it depends. I'm gonna answer pretty on the surface. It depends on what fluid you're blocking. For instance, if I've got my fingers on the carotid artery while I'm doing neck work and I'm stopping blood from flowing, somebody's gonna pass out. So you need to know specifically what you're doing, where you are, and the anatomy of those different parts of the body. But the same thing in the example that you used of eagle arms. Just think about bending your elbows and intertwining your arms. You're still getting blood to your fingers, or they might start to fall asleep if you hold it long enough.
This idea of Sushumna kind of surfaced in my consciousness for this conversation when I was doing my sadhana the other day and chose to do my half sun salutations with my eyes open instead of closed. And we've had this conversation and we'll probably touch on it in other episodes. But this idea of eyes open or eyes closed. For those of you who have meditated with me, you know that the lineage from which I study and teach we leave our eyes open, soft gaze down, and there are reasons for that. We're in awake mode. We are, not jarring from the internal work and the external work. There's a lot going on there. But I started thinking because I prefer having my eyes closed. It feels better. I feel a certain sense of calm. It's a little easier for me to keep my eyes closed. But I've practiced with my eyes open enough that I've gotten to be in a certain balance with it's now a choice and I don't prefer one over the other. But what's interesting to me is that we've talked about the need and the importance of taking public classes, of being out and having teachers, and then also the value of going in and doing our own home practices and taking what we learn and making it our own and creating our own sadhana, our own daily practices. But how important it is to have the external input first so that we can learn the landmarks, so that we can understand a little bit of what we're looking for and how we navigate and utilize these tools. And then once we kind of get the feeling, we can still have external teachers. It's still really important to have teachers, but that we don't have to give our power to the teacher anymore. We can re-empower our own selves in our own understanding of what we're doing. And so the same as with eyes open, eyes closed. I think in the beginning, eyes closed it was easy. I could just kind of close my eyes, but I wasn't really doing anything. And not that meditation is doing, but it just kind of felt like empty space rather than a purposeful, meaningful experience, which can sometimes result from doing nothing, which is what that is. This is all my own process going through all of this stuff. But so all of this is to say that when I kept my eyes open, I saw when I brought my hands together in namaste in prayer pose, and I'm giving the visual now, but if you can imagine, or even just bring your hands together, that we're taking two disparate entities. We're taking Ida and Pingala, and we're drawing them together. We're taking Stira and Sukha, and we're drawing them together. We're taking all of these oppositional, seemingly oppositional energies, drawing them together. And what happens is if I just gently draw my hands together, and we were talking about a light touch, there's a line that delineates my hands, but that also joins my hands. But that is space. There's a long line of space there. For me, that is potential. It's possibility. It's the wholeness. It's all of the things that draw these, binary choices together, but that create the wholeness. If I press really tight and really hard, there's still a line there. There's still space. It's just harder to get into. There's still, you could pry my hands apart, but there's effort going in there, over efforting. So I find even my balance in bringing my hands together. But the metaphor of that line of drawing the hands together in prayer in a reverential mudra of, I the light in me sees the light in you, two separate entities made of the same stuff coming together in this world incarnate at the same time. That's Sushumna to me right now. This is part of, the rabbit hole that I go down when I'm practicing. And I'm like, ooh, let me just see where that'll take me. So haven't seen this written anywhere. I haven't seen it as a part of, a bigger study. But this felt very personal to me. And it made the bigger teachings relevant to my experience so that I can turn around and teach it in a way that feels authentic, that feels like something I have embodied. And that required that my eyes be open. Now, when I close my eyes, I can imagine that line, that space that holds my hands together, and that becomes a deeper teacher for me. But again, it's not, one over the other. Like you should this over that. Do one and then do one for a while. Consistent practice is important, but then do the other thing for a while. Maybe give yourself a month to do each thing and see how that lands and where it takes you, because it is about the journey. And I know that sounds so cliche. It's all about the journey, but it fucking is.
It's all about that journey. And my journey this weekend, I mentioned earlier, was kind of transformational. But what to make it more specific, I left feeling calm, relaxed, totally at peace, as if I was able, with the help of others, to calm those fluctuations of my mind. My mind was quiet, it was still, it wasn't didn't have this little chatter going on the whole time that I was driving home. And so those are the subtle, more intentional things that are harder to quantify. But the other thing that happened was my range of motion in my neck at least doubled. I had walked in from traveling and having an awful lot of things going on the previous week with a variety of aches and pains, uh, that with this light, intentional touch and very specific protocol, I gained range of motion in my neck. I released a low back pain that I was experiencing. Overall, my body, when I left, felt, and it's rare to say this for anybody, even me, a body worker who does what I do. I left feeling pain-free and without stress. In 2 days of being in a class with exchanges with student therapists who were skilled, and you had said earlier, sometimes when you go in for your body work, you want that feeling of the heavier pressure, that's what you went for. You really want to feel that, and I do too many times. I mean, it's just very satisfying, and it's also healing. It's a different type of technique, it's a different type of working. So again, not one over the other, but, balancing out these different types of therapies and blending them in ways that are interesting, unique, and what is being asked for, by the client who's coming in. What are they looking for from their own healing journey? Like, it is a journey. And while I'm talking about this, I do, since I've spoken so much about the class that I took this weekend, I do want to say it's offered by Ganesha Institute, and the teacher is Saskia Cote, and I'll put that in the show notes as well. I'll send that along. It's Saskia. Cote. She was amazing, just the right amount of brilliant and hippie, and I use that word because she used it, not because I'm labeling her with it, but the brilliance I labeled. She didn't say, "Hey, I'm brilliant," not that I remember, but I think she was brilliant and just enough of a hippie to be able to flow through different lineages while she was, teaching. So light work is a transition for me. When I got out of massage school, I was a firmer deep muscle therapist. You go in there, you find it, you get it done. I mean, and that sounds very like step by step. Firmer deep muscle therapy is one of my absolute favorite things to receive, but it has a completely different energetic application than the craniosacral work that I did over the weekend. So just because there's often that resistance to slowing down, the resistance to tapping into this more subtle part of us as humans. There's a lot of information in the subtleties that happen when I am willing to slow down and feel at a level that I have not felt before. I felt like I was floating over my table often, and for somebody who is as left brain and sciency as I am, that is where the transformation came.
That is incredible. And, it speaks to the importance of having your toolbox filled of intake so that you're treating the individual, but you have all of these tools. I think our system here is curative. It's based in like the broadest terms. It's all about the universal and not so much about the individual, recognizing that the individual is part of that collective. And so that personal intake piece, and then knowing this person is coming in, like I've said, when I've gone in for my body work, sometimes is balanced by doing the opposite and sometimes is balanced by
Mm,
meeting me where I am with energetically. So that also talks to having a relationship with your practitioner, going regularly for self-care so that the teacher gets to know the student, the practitioner gets to know the client, and vice versa, so that there's a comfort level, a camaraderie that allows for, like, I know when I've gone in, Bonnie and I have been together now, like, I want to say since 2010, so 13 years.
mm,
And she's done techniques on me that she knows she can do on me that can get kind of intimate because of the relationship that we've built. There's trust. And I know the two of you together in the same kind of, atmosphere, you both are in the same kind of location. You're both very highly skilled practitioners. And I think that that's the key in everything we do is to give enough so that whoever's on the other side of the table, the other side of the mat or cushion can then be able to determine for themselves what works for them. But to be that partner in all of this. It's all about partnership, not hierarchy, which is what men in white, I say men, but people in white coats often feel a certain hierarchy.
and, if you want, like, a simple takeaway from today, it's our bodies want to heal, and they know how to heal. Sometimes for me, I'm not gonna speak for anyone else, I'm standing in its way of healing. And oftentimes, when we step into this place of being on our journey of healing and looking at different lineages, looking at different inroads of ways to facilitate healing within our own bodies, for me, it begins with a holistic awareness. A slowing down to hear what our body, mind, and spirit is asking us for. And at different times in my life, it's asked me for different things. And right now, what I learned from my class this weekend is what my body, mind, and spirit is asking me based on my results from this one weekend of classes is that it wants to slow down and let me build a deeper sense of awareness of who I am and what it needs. So, how does that all translate in the takeaway? How about just stopping and saying, "Hi, body. How are you today?" You're probably wanting me to do something really, really special today for on this journey. Help me to understand what that is, and
I,
then
I,
be
I want
quiet.
I want to say something though too to those who are suffering from severe chronic pain, cancer, autoimmune, diabetes, other things that are I've had these conversations where sometimes, and I know this is not our intention at all, it sort of re-victimizes the victim, so to speak, someone who is ill. And so we know so much is mindset, but mind is hard to work with. And just even if something is psychosomatic, doesn't mean it's not real and that it hasn't manifested, but that we're not here to say, we've said it before, but curing is different from healing. And that these things are not designed necessarily to cure the big things. Listen, we all have an expiration date. We're all going to die. Sorry, that's the another takeaway. It's another sort of spoiler alert. But, that said, everything's impermanent. We get to work with these things, but sometimes even in a situation where there's dire health diagnosis and you're in it, that there's still space for healing to happen on different levels. If there's just, reconciling with old resentments, reconciling with resistance, other things that can happen in the space of illness, because that's also a message. And it's also part of, no one gets out of this life alive kind of thing. And so if you are suffering and you're listening to this and you're like, all right, nice story, tell it to someone who, whatever, it is a story and it is part of a bigger story. And whatever can resonate, whatever feels right for where you are on your journey, that's where you get to start. And we're just here to kind of offer ways like it's like an aspirin, sometimes it just takes away the immediate symptom, but we are not interested in necessarily just symptomatically wiping the cobwebs. That the root causes are important to look at too. But if you're not willing or ready or able to, that's okay too. This is not sort of a way to sort of make you feel worse when you're feeling bad, or don't feel bad that you don't feel worse kind of thing. So for whatever that's worth, I just kind of had these conversations in different ways over the years. And there are many different ways in. And because when we're talking, we're kind of in a bubble here, but we're talking about our experiences and casual conversations. So if you're feeling anything around this and you want to sort of delve in, please email us, ask us questions. We prefer kindness. So if you're able to frame anything kindly, please just, send it to us. Anecdotalanatomy@gmail.com.
There we go. I was just going to say that. So, yeah, getting to know our body is, again, just a way to gain deeper understanding and awareness of where we're coming from and which of the many, many, many different things we talked about resonate. I mean, I can tell you that if this was 15 years ago and I was a body worker and somebody's telling me, all right, so you need to do this really light technique, I'd be like, I can't feel that. I cannot feel that rhythm. There is no way I can do that. But we evolve and we change and we learn and we blend. So yeah, we offer and take what feels good, take what feels right, take what you resonated with and leave the rest behind. I've left the rest behind so many times. And then the next year or the following year or the next class, I'm like, oh, now I get it. So sometimes it takes me a little time.
All of us, man, and the Grateful Dead again. One man gathers what another man spills. So what might not work for you might work for someone else. So there's nothing wasted. And thank you for listening. This is what my husband would have called a hodgepodge. But with, rooted in Sushumna and cranialsacral work.
Yeah. And maps and all kinds of things. So
I think we'll call it channel surfing.
Channel surf. Oh, I like that.
Yep.
Yes.
This
Channel
is episode
surfing.
59, channel surfing.
Until next time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for listening, for rating, reviewing, and subscribing to our channels and other stuff. Thank you for inspiring us to have these conversations and to create contemplative, live experiences that move our bodies, hearts, and minds to the rhythm of our highest selves. Thank you for showing up.
Feel free to send us your stories, questions, and comments to anecdotalanatomy@gmail.com. As always, we want to thank our amazing editor, Judith George, Keith Kenny for our fun music, and Cindy Fatsis for our photos. Journey with us as we continue down the roads of discovery, taking the detours and meeting the mysteries. You are our why. See you next time.